Again, thank you to those who joined us today for this session of the AgrAbility webinar series. My name is Paul Jones. I manage the National AgrAbility Project, which is headquartered at Purdue University. Our topic today is storytelling and social media, connecting to community and beyond. And our presenters, Rachel Dilhoff from Purdue Extension and Olivia De Young from Purdue Agricultural Communications. For those who are not familiar with AgrAbility, we are sponsored by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and we focus on helping people in agriculture that have some type of disability. Every one of the AgrAbility projects around the country is a partnership between a land-grant university and at least one nonprofit disability services organization. Currently, there are 21 state AgrAbility projects around the country, and in addition, there's one national AgrAbility project, again, that's here at Purdue University through the Breaking New Ground Resource Center. Our partners on that grant include Goodwill of the Finger Lakes and Washington State University. If you'd like to know more about AgrAbility, please feel free to check out agrability.org. We've got over 170 archived webinars you can view at your convenience, plus a wealth of information related to disability and agriculture. Our presenters today, Rachel Dilhoff serves as the social media coordinator for Purdue Extension. She has a background in health promotion, communications, and health education, and her work focuses on digital storytelling, content strategy, and helping organizations communicate clearly with diverse audiences. Olivia De Young joined Purdue Agricultural Communications, also known as AgComm, as a communications specialist in July 2024. She serves as a liaison between AgComm and Purdue Extension and splits her time between managing projects, writing web stories and news releases, and supporting statewide events and initiatives. She has a background in professional writing, storytelling, editing, and design. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, turn things over to Rachel and Olivia for the body of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Paul. So Rachel will be controlling the slides, so I will start us off. Thank you everyone so much for attending today. I know Rachel and I are super excited to get to share some of our expertise with you all. If you have questions, we will have time for that at the end. But to sort of get to today's topic, we're going to be talking about storytelling and social media. So we're going to sort of look at the lens of how that can help you connect to your community and then sort of expand that reach out to. So on the next slide, oh, you're good. So basically so just so you know, Purdue Extension is an equal opportunity employer. So Purdue University prohibits the discrimination against any member of the university community on the basis of race, religion, color, sex, age, national origin or ancestry, genetic information, marital status, parental status, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, disability, or status as a veteran. So that is a little bit about Purdue Extension, just so you know that sort of background. Getting into the content. So we've broken up today's presentation into three main parts of storytelling. So when I think about storytelling, I think, you need a storyteller who is telling the story. You need the story itself. So what's that message going to be? And then you need a way to share the story. So you don't want it just to start and stop within your organization. You want it to go beyond that and reach an audience. So Rachel will be more so talking about social media as the way to share that story. And I will sort of walk us through what that storytelling voice looks like as a storyteller, and then thinking about some things when you're crafting the story to get it to be engaging and have people want to interact with it when you share it. So on the next slide. So when you think about a storytelling voice, I would recommend starting with your sort of brand foundation. So that can be a mission statement, a vision statement. Purdue also has a brand essence statement. And these are sort of they form the foundation of your organization, right? So for Purdue, I'm really going to focus on the brand essence here because I think that really influences a lot of Purdue's marketing and what Rachel and I do with Purdue Extension and Purdue College of Agriculture. So Purdue's brand essence, Purdue University is about the persistent pursuit of innovation where people bring their best and learn to build a better world together. So in that description, something that Rachel and I think a lot about is innovation. So what does that look like within Purdue Extension specifically? And what does it look like to learn to build a better world together? So it's important to sort of look at these foundational things to form your voice because everything you communicate should be resonant with these elements. So whenever we create a social media post or a flyer or, work on the website, we really want to be thinking about how can we be conveying that it's important to have that persistent pursuit of innovation. What does it look like to build a better world together? And how are we a part of that larger organizational story? You can also look at something like AgrAbility, whose vision and mission is to enhance the quality of life for farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural workers with disabilities so that they, their families, and their communities can continue to succeed in rural America. So with that sort of example of a storytelling voice, you would expect to see a lot of stories revolving around farmers, ranchers, agricultural workers with disabilities, and that community side in rural America. So when you're thinking about stories, you want to make sure you're understanding how you're speaking about them and how that fits in with the larger mission of the organization. So on the next slide, logos are sort of one way you can sort of communicate who is telling the story. On social media, that might be like your profile picture. On your website, that's probably an already branded element, but if you're doing printed pieces too, having logos included can help people easily identify who is distributing the piece and who's telling the story. So on the next slide, for Purdue, another element that I think Purdue is really great at is having a brand. So ideally, simply put, a brand, usually you can think of like the fonts that are used and the colors that are used. So that is just a visual way to identify who is doing the speaking. So for example, maybe if you work with Goodwill, that like typical like blue and white scheme can sort of help convey that. But I know when Rachel and I work with Purdue things, we focus on using only these Purdue colors. So sort of the golds and the grays and the blacks, because we don't want our voice to get confused with, for example, another university's or another community outreach organization. So really having those strong elements and relying on those can help people visually tell who you are as a storyteller, in addition to those other values that are reflected in mission and vision statements. So on the next slide. So now that you sort of maybe have a better understanding of who your organization is, what you're trying to communicate, I really want to start thinking about the story. So what makes a compelling story? So anyone can write a story, right? But not everything that happens is a story. So between this slide and the next slide, I think that there's about 7 storytelling tips for what makes a compelling story. So first, I just want to start off with stories should be relatable. So relatability means reflecting the experiences, struggles, and aspirations with your audience. For Extension, we really focus on stories that connect with the community's values, challenges, and goals. Because Extension, one of their goals as an organization is to connect with communities. So making sure the stories you tell are relatable to the audience that you're trying to reach. Another thing that can make a compelling story is conflict and resolution. So if we're using Extension as an example, how Extension has identified a community problem or issues that might need to be solved. And also an example would be to highlight how Extension provides solutions to empower communities and show the value and impact. So that sort of creates a story arc. And so that can sort of lead people to want to learn more about, oh, well, there's this problem. How did you fix it? Another thing that a lot of good stories have is an emotional component to it. So I know some pieces might be more informational, but when we're thinking about storytelling, trying to reach people, trying to convey things about our organization and brands, we really want to sort of dig into emotions and try and tell stories that resonate with the audience that way. So we want the audience to feel something, and we want to capture that human element that can deepen the impact of the story. So for example, maybe someone decided to participate in a program because they wanted a healthier life to be a better, grandfather to their family or something. So having that sort of emotional element makes the stories feel less corporate, more authentic, and can really draw people in and attract them in a world where there's a lot of stories being told. So to move on to some other ideas, every story should have a clear purpose, whether that's to inform, persuade, inspire, teach. You want to make sure that your stories have a clear takeaway or key message or lesson. So for example, every story you tell should be able to be sort of distilled down into one goal that you have for the story. So maybe it's just informing people that this program exists. Maybe it's teaching them about a particular topic that you're an expert in. But if there's no clear purpose to the story, the audience doesn't really have a good reason to read it. So every single story should have a clear purpose. I would also recommend every story has clear visuals. Rachel will dive more into that in social media because, as I'm sure we all know, visuals are especially important in social media. So be able to show the audience what's happening, not just telling them. So I'll leave that to Rachel to get more into that, the visual side, but just start thinking when you're crafting a story, what photos do we have available? What photos maybe could we take? Could we ask for photos from people that we're telling their story from, just to help the audience connect what they're reading with something visual. Not every story will have novelty or oddity, but sometimes it can be helpful to have an element that sparks curiosity, maybe to have some sort of twist or an element that defies expectations. So, for example, I wrote a story once about bison in Indiana. So you might not necessarily think about, a field of bison in Indiana. But people might be interested to learn more about that. So when you think about novelty and oddity, maybe not every story would have that, but maybe you can sort of capitalize an unexpected area of your organization or something that you do within your work. And then the last thing, and this really should be focused on with every story, is timeliness. So sometimes this looks like connecting to current events or issues. Maybe there's something, for example, like a flood happened in your area and you want people to know how your organization can help with that. Or maybe it's like a national day, like National like Dairy Day, or a national month. That can be sort of fun to connect. And it can be more engaging for audiences because the audience can relate to it right away. Like, oh, hey, like I didn't know it was National Bison Day. Like, oh, I want to learn more about bison today because of that. So with these 7 values, not every story will necessarily check every single one of these points. But I would say the more check marks you're able to make, usually the stronger and more compelling story you have. So moving to the next slide. Briefly, I'm just going to sort of talk about some different ways you can start to think about sharing your story. So you know who your voice is, you sort of know how you're going to talk. You know that you have a good story that you think people will really like and resonate with. Now is when you need to share it out. So the first way you can do that is through social media, which, like I said, I will let Rachel talk more about that. But when you're looking at social media, in terms of audience, you're trying to reach people that are currently following you and potentially some new people. And the goal with sharing on social media usually is to share information with dedicated followers and to hopefully reach a broader audience through those social media algorithms. Another thing to think about is news releases. So these are about 300 words. They usually are about pre-event promotion. Sometimes it's like a big announcement. Like I know with AgrAbility, they got a placement that was super exciting in a ranking. And so we did a news release about that. But usually news releases just focus on the who, what, where, when, and why. You can sort of ignore that part about using a quote from a Purdue Extension voice, but it's always good in a news release to include a quote from someone that's involved in the event or involved in the placement. Someone saying, hey, this event is great because it's going to teach people X, Y, Z, or hey, this placement was super exciting because it really reflects our company's values of XYZ. Usually you want to publish these at least a month before an event or before registration for your event ends. And for audience, you're really looking at local media and local news readers. Sometimes you'll hit like a national audience with a news release, but usually you're looking at more of a localized specific audience. And the goal is to invite media coverage and usually to increase audience attendance and just raise general awareness of the program. So it's not as targeted an audience as social media. It's a little bit more broad. Something else to consider is web stories. So these are usually about 300 to 800 words. These would include things like post-event coverage, if you're launching a new program, or really diving into the impact on your surrounding communities and the human impact as well. So this would live on your website, and again, you can just sort of pass over some of the more extension specific stuff here. But what I really want you to take away is that the audience here would be internal people to make sure the people on your team and within your organization sort of know the impacts of what you do, but also external audiences. So are there stakeholders that want to know what the human impact is? For example, like local government officials. Web stories can be a great way to sort of spread that reach outward. And the goal would be to have more of an in-depth exploration of a topic, a program, event, or person. So with social media, that's sort of like the elevator pitch, really quick. News releases are more just a big overview about sort of what is happening and where and when and why. And web stories are more the in-depth, get to know you a little bit better kind of stories. And the last thing that I just sort of threw in here too is newsletters. So if you have a company newsletter that you send out, it can also be helpful to reshare some of this other content in your newsletter. So maybe you have a news release, you can link to it in your newsletter. Maybe you published a web story. You can also share it through newsletters as well. So really with newsletters, you're just curating existing content. Maybe you also had like media coverage that you want to highlight too. That can be great to highlight in a newsletter. These audience members will usually be internal and external stakeholders. So they're people that would be super invested in your organization and would be very interested in receiving these updates. So once again, a little bit more, this is probably the most niche audience of these four categories. But the overall goal of including content in a newsletter would be to increase awareness of existing content and encouraging people to engage with the program or event. So I know that was sort of a lot, but really we're going to sort of narrow in on social media since that's usually the most accessible way to tell stories and sort of one of the best ways to reach new audiences. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel for her to sort of talk about Extension's approach and some ways that you can be thinking about sharing your story on social media.
Yes, so Olivia did a great job explaining all the different types of stories to tell and how to tell them. I like what she said about social media and the elevator pitch, because I always think about it when I'm writing something for social media. I had worked in TV for a little bit and behind the scenes, and I remember when they were writing their stories and the hook. So I always keep that in the back of my mind when I'm writing it. I want to hook people in to learn more, to ask questions. We share a lot of events that come up, or we'll share stories, and I'm thinking of myself in the reader's position and what would make me want to learn more, or say, wow, I didn't know we had that, or I didn't realize this was an option. Let me go and find out more. So with that being said, the way I'm going to use Purdue Extension as an example of social media and how our stories are told. So we have a Facebook account, an X account, and like LinkedIn. I put the numbers there of how many followers we have, and I also have on the side of that the age range for those groups. So that's important to keep in mind, as Olivia mentioned, because you want to know your audience. We share stories all the time, and we'll go back and look at analytics, and we'll come up with, okay, well, why did it do is what it did. How poor, how great, how poor, why did it do that? So then we look a little deeper at, okay, well, let's remember our audience and, who we're talking to, which is important, as Olivia mentioned. Some tips. So I have that on the right side, making sure it's relevant. And a lot of this is what Olivia's already said, but I'm just going to say it again. Relevant content. So we know a lot of our followers on Extension, they're into agriculture or maybe cooking, because we have health and human sciences as well as ag and natural resources, and 4-H is a big one too. So keeping that in mind, as we're sharing stories and events and whatnot. And as Olivia mentioned too, timeliness. So for example, Groundhog's Day was last week, and I was thinking to myself, what's something that, how can we attach Purdue Extension to that? And I went looking and I found that we had a publication on groundhogs and the destruction that they do with fields in Indiana. So being able to tie those things together, and it was relevant and it was timely, and it reached our audience because they could relate to that. Like, oh yeah, like I do have fields and those groundhogs are causing a mess out there. So that's just an example. Also, posting consistently, that is another way to reach a lot of your audience, but not too much. So that can throw off the algorithm, which I'm still trying to fully understand myself. But I do know posting consistently, but not too much, is key. Some platforms, it doesn't matter as much, but Facebook, I tend to do 5 days a week, twice a day. Some days, maybe one or two more or less, just kind of depends on what's going on, and sometimes on the weekends. But a lot of times, especially our audience is out and about during the week, and so we don't get a lot of interaction anyway, so we take that time off. But knowing your audience, and maybe your audience would be very active on the weekends, so knowing that, and you can adjust accordingly. But again, making it consistent, but not too much. Tagging and encouraging others to share and comment. That's really helpful to get the message out there and in front of different audiences. We partner a lot with community partners, so we do a lot of tagging there. And I noticed that when we tag different events or different people, that tends to increase our following, which is exactly what we want. And that's really good. Sometimes what we share will generate a lot of comments, and that's also good because I don't know what it is with that in the algorithm, but it tends to get in front of more people, and then we get more comments. So that's a great thing. And then as well as engaging in the comments too, we get a lot of questions. If an event's coming up, somebody might write, well, if I can't be there in person, what can I do? Is there a recording option? Something like that. So being able to respond to them there. I also get a lot of messages especially on Facebook. So just being there to answer those questions is really important as well. Olivia mentioned visuals, which that is important because not only are your words reaching people, but that visual is also what's really going to draw them in. And going back to that brand, that's important. We, in Extension, we have representation in all 92 counties in Indiana, and every county is slightly different. And we really want to show that cohesiveness because it's very easy to get off brand sometimes. So making sure that we are consistent and having those quality visuals that are uniform, we really strive to do that. It's not always perfect, but it's a work in progress, and I know we're getting better at it each time we post. So having that, again, with the visuals. So if you're at an event, taking some pictures, maybe in front of your booth, or if there's a really cool action shot, something like that, that's really neat to include as well. Or if you're promoting an event that's annual and you have some pictures from the year before and you want to include those, great, absolutely do that. definitely want to shy away from the blurry pictures, or if it's, like the top of somebody's head or something that people might say, okay, I don't know, that's not visually appealing to me. So it might make them want to scroll to the next thing, because they're scrolling quick. So you want to have that grab their attention and then make them want to read more about it. And I'm sorry, I've got this covered up. Oh, something else that you can do as well is boosting. So that is paying to have your message in front of more people. We do a lot of boosting, mainly on Facebook. We've tried X and LinkedIn, and we found that we've had the most bang for our buck on Facebook. So we have boosted different events or programs. Right now, we're currently boosting our annual impact report stories. So you can just put however much you want towards that, and you have the option to pick your audience. You can target that. So that is really helpful too, to make sure that that message is getting in front of who you want it to get in front of. So those are some tips I have. Oops. And I want to go through an example that we did over the summer. So we wanted to show our connection, Purdue Extension's connection at the Indiana State Fair. And we were thinking, well, how do we do that? What's the best way to do that? And a couple years ago, we went ahead and did a video series, and it went really well. So we did it again this past year. And it was really neat because we were able to showcase not only Purdue Extension and our involvement with the Indiana State Fair, but we were also able to include a lot of our partners. So I'll show you this video here in a moment, but these are our partners from ISDA and Indiana Farm Bureau. And we did a very funny, but tasteful and educational series, and they're about 30-second videos, and I think we had about 10 or so of them that played throughout the entirety of the Indiana State Fair. So this is one example. And before you listen to this video, just know that the theme this year was the sounds of summer, I believe, or the sounds of the state fair. So that's why it'll make sense. Okay.
You're on the spot with Purdue Extension. Name these sounds that you could hear at the Indiana State Fair.
Sure, we can. Cow. Yeah. Sheep.
All popcorn at the Purdue Extension building. Yep.
That's Eric headed to lunch. Yes, that's me, definitely. Pig. Yep. Pig.
Don Liam.
Tractor.
Chicks, birds, yeah. Is that a llama? This is Sean before lunch.
That's Eric after lunch.
A llama? I have no idea what that is. Oh my goodness. My husband, after he eats milkshakes.
So that was a very short clip, but there was actual months that went into the planning of this. Every element of this video was a strategy. The questions, we wanted people to know what animals were at the Indiana State Fair. We wanted to tie it in with the theme of the Indiana State Fair. We picked our participants very strategically. And we also, again, those sounds were all part of Purdue Extension in some way, shape, or form. And not only Purdue Extension, but Purdue Extension at the Indiana State Fair. So if you've ever been to the Indiana State Fair and the Purdue Extension building, they are noted for the popcorn. So we definitely wanted to make sure to include that. So again, every element of that was very strategic and intentional, and down to the branding. I mean, AgComm did such a great job at putting it all together and packaging it. But again, a lot went into this, and I wanted to show what our results for this were, because this was our best performing video. And you can see we we posted it the same day, same time on all 3 platforms. Facebook, it did the best on Facebook. So views, over 10,000 reach, interactions. Again, I mean, Facebook blew everything else out of the water, which is to be expected because we have more followers on there as well. But we had a lot of engagements. We had a lot of people sharing those and seeing a side of people that they might not see, because a lot of these individuals, you don't necessarily see this side of them. So that was really neat too. So again, every part of that very strategic and well done, well packaged together. And it took a while to get to that point, but it just goes to show you what taking that little bit of extra time can do in the long run. And not only are we getting traction out of it this year, but we did a series very similar the year prior and noticed that there was an uptick of viewings as we got closer to the Indiana State Fair. So that was really nice to be able to reuse, and we plan to do that again this coming year, take parts of what we did last year to sort of tease this coming year. And if I can, not only that, so this is just another example of visuals going along with this. So we had the video, that was a nice visual. And then we also had our own templates that went along with the Indiana State Fair, and they were our Purdue colors and all the brand elements that Olivia showed, as well as the Indiana State Fair logo was on that. And we encouraged our educators and everybody else throughout the state, Purdue Extension, to utilize this as well if they were talking about the Indiana State Fair. But it was a great way to show that cohesiveness as well. And it was a very easy way to do that because you could just plug it in and then post, which was nice. Another part of this as well, besides the branding, is showing that the after effect of it. So not only were like the videos showing the actual event itself and our involvement there, but then we were thanking people after for coming. There was also a web story, and I believe there was like a photo gallery that went along with this as well, just giving our audience different ways to see what we did. Again, we can use it for this coming year and beyond. So it was done for a reason, and we can reuse it. It's not, all this effort isn't just a one and done type of thing. So keeping that in mind as well as you're sharing your story is very helpful. And then actually, Olivia, is this yours? Okay.
It is. Yeah. So I can jump back in here. So sort of to start, wrapping things up, now that you have all this information, Rachel and I recommend that you start building a storytelling strategy. So I sort of think of this as a plan for now and a plan for later. So I feel like strategy can be sort of a big word. Sometimes it can feel a little bit daunting to sort of form a strategy if you don't already have one. So I sort of broke it down into 4 different questions you can ask as you're sort of forming a game plan for how you want to be telling stories about your organizations. So my first question is, what's a priority to share? So for Purdue Extension, our priorities shift, but overall, like our top 4 priorities are to share about our 4 different program areas. So to share about agriculture and natural resources, to share about Indiana 4-H, to share about health and human sciences extension, and then to share about community development. So, making sure that when we have a strategy, we're highlighting those 4 areas so you can sort of apply that to your own teams about what is most important for you to be sharing at that point. Something else to look at is what are others doing that you can build off or emulate, or what has already been done. I mean, we've showed you some examples from Purdue Extension, so maybe there's something that you saw today that you could tailor and make your own. Maybe there's people already within your organization that are doing some of this work. At Purdue University, because I work in the College of Ag, sometimes Rachel and I will look at like the big university level to see what the university's marketing and communications team are doing, because sometimes there's good ideas there or from different colleges. Maybe you can look at similar organizations to yours and see if there's some good ideas there that you can sort of build off. And you can also look back at your organization and say, hey, maybe there is this really successful story, maybe there's a really successful news release or social media post. So sort of building on what's already been successful for your organization or what's been successful for others. And while also making it your own, personalized to your storytelling voice. So a big thing too is what stories can you share with the time that you have? I'm sure that if you're like me, you probably have a million ideas for stories that you want to share or that you could share or write if you had all the time in the world. But I know a lot of us have limited schedules and usually limited budget sort of can play into that as well. So sort of thinking about like, okay, well, maybe here's a list of 10 story ideas and it'd be great if we could tell all of these, but what are, maybe 2 or 3 stories that are the most important to share that we think our audience would care the most about. So, brainstorming, dreaming big, but then also being practical with your strategy and making sure that it's realistic and doesn't become overwhelming. So then the last sort of question I have to think about is how can you repurpose and reuse stories for other audiences? So it's great to have a social media post. It's great to have a story, but it's even better when you're able to repurpose and reuse things. So maybe you have a publication, for example, about groundhogs, like Rachel had mentioned earlier. For our example, we were able to repurpose it for Groundhog Day. Maybe for your organization, it can look like taking a impact story about like a user success story and repackaging that for something like an annual meeting, sharing with local media, maybe making that like a media pitch, or just talking to stakeholders. Maybe that would be something printed, maybe that would be something digital, but really thinking about the different ways you can do that. For example, if you have a web story, you can reshare on social media and you can reshare in a newsletter. So there's all different ways that you can sort of take the same thing let me restart that. There's all different ways that you can sort of take one story and get lots of use out of it to make the best use of your time. So on the next slide, just sort of the last thing I guess I want to leave you all with is that having a plan is important for Sorry, it looks like it broke up for a second. But it can be hard to find time for those larger strategic conversations. But it's not going to only help you, 5 years from now, 1 year from now, 6 months from now. It will help you in the short term because the more time you spend working on storytelling, the more you're reaching your audience and the greater impact your work can have or the greater awareness others can have of your work. So, sorry, there is one more slide that I sort of forgot about. I don't know if you guys have seen those sort of cheesy inspirational posters, but I was feeling a bit inspired when Rachel and I were putting this together. So you might be asking, so now what? So if you click Rachel, I think we'll get my sort of cheesy inspirational picture. But something that Rachel and I talk a lot about is that practice makes perfect. So like I said, I know that might be a little bit cheesy or corny, but really sort of the best way to start with storytelling is just to do it. So maybe it's, by starting with 2 social media posts a week and sort of building from there. So you can start small and build up from there, but it's hard to sort of know your audience and to figure out what resonates with them if you don't try. So you don't have to be perfect at first, but the practicing is the best way to get to building a stronger audience and building a stronger storytelling culture. And yeah, so practice makes perfect. So we hope that you don't feel overwhelmed. We're excited to get to all of your questions. You guys have been very active in the chat, so we're really excited to get to engage. So I think the next slide maybe is just our questions slide, but yeah.
Thanks so much, Rachel and Olivia. Appreciate all that excellent content. This time I'm going to turn things over to Ed Sheldon, who's going to be, he's been monitoring our chat area, and he's going to be sharing your questions with our presenters. And also just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question verbally, you can use the raise hand option under the engage icon, and I will do my best to unmute you. So Ed, you want to take it away?
working on it here.
If it's okay, I got a question directly sent to me if we want to start with that one.
Sure.
So one person asked, how are your news releases versus web stories distributed differently? Where do news releases live? So for Extension, both our news releases and web stories live on our Extension news website. So that just has like a whole bunch of stories about Extension that we've been working on. The distribution works a little bit differently. So with web stories, that typically is posted directly to our website and linked to on social media. We do the same with news releases, but the different with news releases are those are shorter and those get pitched to media. So we're very lucky at Purdue that at the university level, there is a marketing service that has listservs, I guess, like lists of local media, and we have relationships with local media. So our news releases will go through those lists and those channels to get sent out to certain media outlets. But I would say that's the main difference is news releases will just get pitched and shared with media, local media or statewide media, sometimes national media, but usually just local or statewide media. And the web stories are primarily just directed towards our general audience.
Okay, you guys ready for me? Okay. What's everybody see on their screen? Are you?
We're seeing the slides.
Okay, because I've got one screen that still shows Rachel and Olivia's slide. Okay, first question. Why do you not use Instagram?
It's a great question. I don't know if I have a really good answer for that other than the majority of our audience is not using Instagram. And not only that, but we share a lot of like stories and they don't translate super great onto Instagram. I don't know, Olivia, if you have anything to add, because there are some groups within Purdue that do utilize Instagram, but we've found that it didn't really serve us that well. But I don't know, Olivia, if you had anything else.
Yeah, I think the main thing is just sort of where, like Rachel was saying, with the audience and sort of the demographics. So I think a lot of the key people that Extension works with are sort of that like 25 and older sort of working age. And a lot of people that are heavily involved in agriculture, and for whatever reason, they tend to gravitate towards Facebook more. We don't have anything against Instagram. For example, like the College of Agriculture uses Instagram, but primarily we use that for targeting prospective students. So people that might want to attend the Purdue's College of Agriculture and current students and like young alumni. So usually with Extension's audience, it feels like we're able to reach those audiences more and they're already on Facebook. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
I think that leads right into question number 2. And why do you only use Facebook to reach audiences over 35? Is any more thoughts on that?
That is where a lot of our audience is at. However, LinkedIn, that was something relatively newer. That was our newer platform that we started posting on, which is growing quite a bit. There's always the audience is growing there, which is great. And sometimes the message that we put there is slightly different. It's more of like, let's brag on what our people are doing, necessarily versus come to this program. So the message is slightly shifted on those. I try to be really intentional about that. But all that to say, that is a little bit of the older audience as well on that platform. So we do try other platforms for that, reaching that older audience. But Facebook, that age group, that really, they like their Facebook, it seems. So stick with
Fair
that.
enough. Fair enough. Let's see. Hashtags. Are they still useful or important? And does that apply to all the platforms or any specific one?
Olivia, I'm gonna talk with you about. I'm gonna have you chime in on this too because I like using tags more so than the hashtags, but I do use the hashtags. I don't know from like the College of Ag level what the view is on hashtags, but I'll let you weigh in on that. Like I said, I use them sometimes, but
Yeah, I think from sort of what I've heard from more like the university marketing level, they still do recommend using hashtags, but I think the way that hashtags are used is a little bit different than maybe it was like, say, 10 years ago. I think a lot of it now is sort of keying the algorithm into what your post is about and sort of larger things. So, for example, like if you're on a website, right, you have these like keywords for search engine optimization or SEO. I think we're seeing now a lot of social media platforms sort of using hashtags the same way. So I don't think people are necessarily clicking, like if we say like hashtag Purdue Extension, I don't think people are necessarily clicking on that hashtag and like searching for Purdue Extension posts. But from my understanding on that back end, it's sort of keying in Facebook, the algorithm into, oh, these are all Purdue Extension related. So that's sort of how I've been mostly seeing it used. So they're definitely still useful, but I would say keep them to a minimum. You probably don't need 10. I'd say maybe 2 to 3. And if you do use hashtags, I recommend using camel case, which just means like using the capital letters between words instead of having everything like kind of squished together with all lowercase letters, just because that's more accessible for more people.
And I also try to put them within the post text. I don't know if that is, I just prefer it that way because I think it flows a little bit better versus having it at the end and the list of the hashtags. So that's just my preference, but to each their own, I think, for hashtags in that way.
Fair enough. Let's see. What percentage of your post or video versus stills versus carousels?
So
Either one of you.
well, I was going to say for the carousel with Olivia, I know that's a website thing,
So
right?
yeah, I mean, I think carousels are more of an Instagram thing. I would say with extension, we typically just do one photo for a post instead of like having like a multi-image post. Right?
I also think too what your view is going to be. And it really does depend on the number of quality photos we get as well. I don't want to do especially with Facebook, I try not to do a ton of them. Just because people aren't going to necessarily look at them and there's only so many that pop up at one time. So I'm trying to be mindful of that. X, I believe you can only put 4 or 5 in there at a time. So they do limit you. Facebook, I think you can have up to 20 or I don't even know if there's a limit from Facebook. I think Instagram is 20, even though I don't use that for extension, but that's just an idea. Also video, we tend not to use those as much. That's more for the special things because there is a process to get them perfect. So there's a lot of elements to the videos. So we don't necessarily use those as much. Or if we do use those, there's been a lot of work on the back end to get them ready to be posted. That's why we use more graphics or photos versus videos.
Yeah, and just to sort of piggyback off that too, I think a lot of it depends on the story that we're trying to tell through social media. So for example, with State Fair, it's a very visual event. There's lots of elements that you can't really capture in a photo. So video really makes sense for that. And it feels like video tends to be more broad. The downside to video is it does tend to be more labor intensive. Sort of our part of our storytelling voice is we tend to be more have more of a professional tone. So we wouldn't exactly do like a day in the lifestyle video like some other organizations might. So that's part of why we don't use videos much, because our videos tend to be more, I wouldn't say like they're like a high production value, but sort of that like a little bit above just recording something on your phone. So that's part of why we don't use videos. And then when thinking about photos too, like for example, if there's like a lot of things going on, like going back to State Fair, I think we did a post where we sort of took people around the Purdue Extension building. So just to show all the different facets, we did different pictures. But for example, if we're just posting about like an event follow-up, we might only have like one photo for that, if that makes sense. So sort of just depending on what the audience would want to see from that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, what are your thoughts on, and a couple of these we had some comments, so I added the comments in afterwards, but the question was, what are your thoughts about posting the same post on Instagram and Facebook, or both Instagram and Facebook, or should you create a separate post? And I suppose you could follow, that Facebook and X as well, or whatever.
Yeah. I try not to recreate the wheel as much as possible. So I will use what I can for whatever platform I can, because it's the same thing. The message might be slightly different, like I mentioned with LinkedIn. And I might have a story promoting or like an after event talking about that, and I would maybe for LinkedIn talk about the people behind it more so than the event. Like we had our educators from Adams County at this event promoting XYZ. So it like the voice might be slightly different depending on the platform. For X, you have X amount of characters you can use, so you have to shorten that down. So a lot of my posts, and I've tried to be more condensed, condense it down as much as possible. But sometimes what I do post on Facebook versus X will be a little different, just because I can't put as much out there on X. So yeah.
Excuse me. Okay. Any thoughts, Olivia?
I agree with what Rachel said.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. And then a couple of thoughts there is some use the same videos, change the format, the vertical or horizontal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, with Reels, that was a newer thing. The last 2 years, we started doing Reels, and I know the formatting on that is different. So there was some work on the back end to make sure it fit with what it needed to be.
On the Reels, did they take you mentioned all of the behind the scenes work to post videos? Do the Reels, are they a little more of a shortcut, or or do you have to do the same process on those?
We typically do the same process. So, for example, I see someone in the chat is mentioning accessibility, which now is a good point to sort of mention that. So with our Reels and our videos, we have a separate caption file that we upload as well. So like all like the same editing style is applied to the Reels versus the horizontal videos, like the people's titles and things, adding the captions. So it's really the same process for both. For Rachel and I, luckily we don't have to do that. AgComm has a video team that is great at what they do and helps out with that. It's a fairly small video team, but they're very small but mighty. So that's part of why, yeah, we do sort of the same thing for both.
Okay. Let's see. What is the most? Oh, and then we got a lot of discussion on this one. Most user-friendly video editing app for non-professionals. And looks like we've got a few votes for CapCut, Canva, Final Cut Pro. So several options out there, it sounds like. What do you guys go to?
So our video team uses not user-friendly video editing apps. We usually use Adobe Premiere. So I don't know if you've ever been in Adobe Premiere. I had to do it for a class once, and let me tell you, it is great. It's a very powerful tool, but it is not very user-friendly. So Yeah, luckily we have a video team for that, but I have heard good things about CapCut. I know that that's a pretty popular one.
Okay. I'm going to jump back here, and because I realized that every time I added a question, everybody was seeing it on the screen. So that came in since we started talking. Okay, we found having a link tree in our bio points folks to point folks to and from Instagram posts, and especially sharing links and stories has made Instagram much more useful for us at Cornell. We also definitively reach new people more often through Instagram than other platforms. Melissa mentions that she's found Facebook's a 40+ crowd. I resemble that. Twitter has been better for outdoor-based activities. Instagram works well for health-related topics, and TikTok is difficult.
Yeah, in case you're wondering why we didn't have TikTok on there, Purdue University does not use TikTok, so we do not have a TikTok account. So best of luck to you guys that are navigating that platform.
Yes. Yes.
Let's see.
Don't envy you there.
Melissa, I've had 220,000 views on my Facebook post in 8 months. Had 190 followers on 2 accounts. Wide reach came from sharing to public groups, and then monthly newsletter, 375 recipients. Audience of my events has grown from 3 to 15 to 50 to 100 people in a frontier county in Wyoming. So kind of shows the impact that the social media can have. I've also included pictures of people from my events, and people love that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That is another thing too. We tend to get a lot more traction when we showcase our own people there at different events, because the counties then they'll take it, run with it, and that's amazing too. That gets a lot of traction. So having that, just another way to boost what you're doing. And then people are saying, oh my gosh, you're an educator from my county. That's awesome. And I'm going to share it. So that is very helpful too.
Let's see. Melissa goes on to say, I don't share social media posts in my newsletter. I put out flyers, my programs with a short paragraph of information on what's happening. Also post for other extension educators on occasion when they have events going on in my region. I have a non-university sections for non-profit groups to share educational events. I think what makes my social media popular last year is that I post about my events and recap events I have recently had with a thank you to partners and images of attendees. People like to see the pictures on my flyers and on social media. It kind of goes to that personal connection. Let's see. Moving on down. Thinking about providing equitable access to messages and communications. Do you use specific font sizing or colors, for example? So that comes back to the accessibility question.
Yeah, so with Purdue, like I said, Purdue's university marketing is really great because they sort of have laid out those color contrast standards for us. And as I'm sure a lot of you are experiencing the new ADA federal guidelines, we will be paying even more attention to things like color contrast. But something that we've already been doing is trying to make sure that the images that we post are accessible. So I know an issue that we've sort of run into is the question of, to post or to not post a flyer. And something that we have really discussed is posting just an image of a flyer really is not accessible to people. For example, if someone was using a screen reader, they would lose all of that sort of context and that text. Yeah. So, trying to include as minimal information on social media graphics as possible, including that same information in the post text, and also, linking maybe to your website where that could be accessed in HTML. So just having different ways for people to access that information. Web accessibility is like a whole another conversation, but that does sort of play into our web stories. So we make sure that like when we do post a story, usually it's just like, black text on a white background, or if there are design elements, they do pass those AA color contrast standards for web. I see how someone was mentioning alt text. Right, Joel, I know that you deal with that more. If you want to sort of talk about that, because I know we already talked about captions, but alt text is definitely another piece of the puzzle there.
Yes. And that is something definitely as we're making these changes, being more intentional about. And that's why I like to link a lot of times, especially, and Olivia, you can speak maybe more to this. But the links, you can on the back end have an image that populates with it. And Olivia, I feel like I'm probably not saying any of that correctly. So I don't know how you do it on that end. But I do know for that I can avoid using the alt text. But for any images that I have or graphic, we use Mark and we'll mostly or Canva to create something a little bit more visually accessible, I guess. I don't know the right way to phrase that. And then I will just include some of the text that's on there, saying like, this is a graphic saying XYZ with a photo of a tomato or whatnot. Yeah, just explaining it that way. Because I put a lot of thought into the alt text at first. I was way overthinking it, but it was not as hard as I was making it out to be. And the more I do it, the easier it's become.
Yeah, I think the main thing is on social media, just sort of keeping graphics simple. And if you do have a web story or a news story, making sure to have alt text with all those images.
Okay. Let's see. That kind of catches the next one. We've talked some about accessibility now. Here's the question that came direct to me, but it's probably more appropriate for you two. How many people are on your marketing team versus your video team?
So the College of Agriculture, which supports extension, we have about 25 people, I would say. We have like one person dedicated just to the College of Agriculture social media on our team. We have some other people that are servicing our colleges departments. I work directly with Extension, but sort of talking about our video team, we have one dedicated photographer, which is amazing. He does really great work. And then we have our video team manager, Aaron, and then we have Kelsey and Steve, who are other two video producers. So we have 3 people working on video for all 12 of our of the College of Agriculture's departments, and then also supporting Extension as well.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, there was the comment about alt text. So JJ says they have great luck with TikTok videos at Lincoln University, which is cool. Let's see. That's a comment. Let's see. Good example. Okay, good examples of image descriptions from our FNEP team, and the link is provided there. So thank you. Let's see. Okay, Melissa, I believe my social media and newsletter have an influence on the funding of my programming. I try not to charge for my classes. Recently, donors have reached out. That's awesome. Help me discuss how they can support future programs. Let's see. And Melanie, I'm wondering how much to share about my disability story. I don't like to talk about it, so I don't share much. It's not a visible issue, but I know it's part of my story. Is there an amount that's too much? I don't want to have a victim mindset, just wondering what an appropriate balance might look like. Interesting question.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to sort of depend on, I mean, of course, your comfortability with sharing that will come first and foremost. Beyond that, I think a lot of it depends on the audience that you're sharing it with and sort of tying it into that like larger purpose. So when I, just sort of expanding it to like, when I work on like a profile about a person, for example, I might sit down and have an interview that's like an hour long, right? They tell, and I get like a lot of details about this person. And then, you're trying to boil it down to, 300, 500 words, maybe 800 words if it's like a really long story, right? And so when I'm sort of going through all these details that I have about a person, I sort of try and think about, what's the main message that I want people to take away from it? Maybe I don't mention, that they raised sheep on a farm growing up, unless it's a story about, why they have a passion for sheep. So sort of to get back to your question, I think you have to sort of think about what is the purpose of sharing your story and what do you want people to take away from it. And I think that'll sort of maybe dictate what details you include. And there's nothing wrong too with having like a rough draft. So maybe you're like, I'm just going to start wide and I'm going to start, with a 2,000 word story, just sort of getting everything down on the page and then sort of narrowing in like, okay, like what are the most important details we want people to share? Because people to understand. Because I think when you think about storytelling and especially digital content, people have really short attention spans a lot of the time. So trying to distill things down to a small enough level where things are still accurately represented and the purpose is still clear, while also being able to maintain the audience's attention. And I mean, it depends on the story, right? I mean, maybe it would be worthwhile to do a more in-depth story and to include a lot more details. Like I said, it just sort of goes back to what your purpose is and maybe sort of like where you're, sharing that part too. So I hope that helps. Yeah. Yeah. And always running it by people too. I saw the comment about asking other people
Yes,
to share your
absolutely.
disability as a common denominator. Yeah, asking for feedback because sometimes it's hard to parse out, what's most important to share or what maybe is still really important, but maybe not relevant to the story that you're trying to tell in that particular case. So hopefully that helps. And that sounds like a really interesting.
Okay. But before Paul cuts us off, I can see him. He's thinking about it. I have a question. I want to bring Rachel in. We've talked mainly about using social media to tell our story. Rachel and Olivia definitely join in, but I know Rachel was involved in this. Tell us a little about using social media for crisis communication, for lack of a better term.
Yes. So it's very important. Think about like a snow. I know I'm in Southern Ohio and we had a snowstorm and people were glued to seeing what is it? When's it happening? What's going to happen? Like in a crisis event as well. I know what Ed's talking about with the fire. There was a big fire, and people. And I know I'm not doing this story justice, but there was a big fire, and a lot of people were very concerned about like produce and their health because of the ash that was coming down. And people go and get their information a lot of times, especially nowadays, from social media, and having that information out there in a timely manner and letting people know what's going on, where they can go for more information is very important. And I know for this particular event, we were promoting not only this event, but then also tying it in with Indiana Prepared and the resources that were available on that website. And I don't know, Ed, I think when you pulled the analytics from the web, like the correlation between when that post went out versus the traffic that went to the website, it was very high, which is exactly what we want to happen. So yes, very important to get the word out there during those events. And we did a lot of tagging as well, which was very important because there was a lot of like the health department there. I know we tagged a bunch of other groups as well. So getting that visibility out there. And Ed, I don't know if you want to share anything else with that, but that was a very positive experience.
I think main thing I wanted to point for, especially for extension folks that happen to be on here from around the country, we didn't know how well it would work, but it really did in that particular instance. How else we would have gotten that information into that many people's hands in 24-hour period. So it's a great tool out there. it's great that we have social media to be able to tell our story from day to day, but it's also when push comes to shove, it's nice to have that tool there to use.
And it also, I think, opened people's eyes to the fact that extension can help with something like that, which is spreading awareness. I know that was not necessarily the initial intent, but it was an added bonus to it. Just letting people know, if they didn't already know, that extension's here. We have resources for in the future too.
Okay, now I'll let Paul in.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rachel and Olivia, especially for your expertise and for sticking around. Thank you to all of our participants. Many of you are still on, so we appreciate that. Again, we are recording. We'll be archiving this hopefully this week and sending out an announcement. And also just a reminder to please give us some feedback when the webinar ends, and hopefully that survey will pop up. You will be on our list for future webinars when those are announced and available. So again, thank you, everybody. And with that, we'll wish you a good day.